this episode of the Strong Kind podcast. This episode is with Jared Maynard. Jared is a powerlifting coach. He's a physical therapist, physiotherapist. That's what they call him in Canada. Jared is a pretty incredible human being. He went through a very life-threatening autoimmune condition known as HLH in 2023. And he's bounced back really well. He's got an incredible story. We had a great chat. We spanned a lot of different topics, and I hope you enjoy it. So check it out on Spotify or YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. If you would be so inclined, please leave a positive review, and I appreciate you listening. All right, so I'm going to start with the deep stuff, which is your favorite Sith Lord.
My favorite Sith Lord. I mean, there's pretty stiff competition because you can look at Bane as instituting the rule of two and completely just recognizing all that was wrong with the Brotherhood of Darkness and where the Sith had gone astray and deciding, you know what, I'm the guy to change that, destroying everybody else and starting from ground zero. So I respect that a lot. You can look at Revan, who was and is one of the most powerful Jedi and Sith, and then redeemed Jedi afterwards.
Dude, you're so much deeper into the lore than I had any concept of, which I recognize some of these, but I'm like, holy shit, what's going on? All right,
I'm a
going.
massive nerd. You obviously Sidious and Vader.
Yeah.
Dooku, arguable whether he was actually a true Sith or not. Right now, I'm going to go with Bane, Revan as a second, Vader and Sidious in that order.
Have you watched? Okay, so have you watched Ahsoka?
I watched most of it. I forget. I think I stopped an episode or two shy of the end of the season. Yeah.
Okay. I'm liking it so far. I was sad to see that Ray Stevenson passed away. Like that was just awful. Because that guy's honestly like he should be in, he could have been in so many more things, right? But I'm liking it so far. I'm not okay, I will just admit you just hit me with way more lore than I know. Which is good. But yeah, like I'm liking it so far. I like what they're doing with the Star Wars universe right now. I'm entertained by it, so I guess that's what matters. But dude, kudos to you. So, what color would your lightsaber be?
So it would probably be green because if we're going to go pre-Disney acquisition of Lucasfilm and the new canon, the lightsaber color corresponded to like typical strengths or attunements. So the green was typically for the Jedi consulars, people like Yoda, Qui-Gon Jinn, who were like particularly skilled with the Force and diplomacy and things like that. They were still skilled with a lightsaber, but they had a lot of like Force attunement and could negotiate all that. So Qui-Gon's my real draw. Qui-Gon was the real deal, and he's the father that Anakin needed, but never got.
Dude, God, I'm reading up on this now. I just love that what's his name? Mace Windu. Gosh, Samuel L. Jackson is like, I have a purple lightsaber, right? Like that story is amazing.
And now there's whole explanations of like, well, it's because Mace Windu developed, his adaptation of Form 7, which drew on a little bit of the dark side. So it's the combination of red and blue, and it's all just because the real world explanation is Samuel freaking L. Jackson wanted a purple lightsaber to spot himself, like in the scenes, and George is like, yeah, maybe, and it happened.
Do you have, all right, this will be the last Star Wars question. Do you have any like qualms with the first three, the original trilogy, not the original trilogy. Okay, like you know what I'm talking about.
The sequel trilogy?
The sequel trilogy. Do you have any qualms with it, or do you still like appreciate it for what it was?
So yes, I do, and yes, I can appreciate some of what's been tried. And I'll qualify that statement by saying I would point to how disjointed the whole vision was, particularly looking at the directors. And then also it's kind of telling, you hear from J.J. Abrams, you hear from Rian Johnson, especially for The Last Jedi, and it's back to J.J. Like Rian especially wanted to do things very differently than had been done before.
Hmm.
And you could like that a lot, you could dislike that a lot, or fall somewhere in the middle. When I first saw The Force Awakens, when it came out, I forget whatever year it was, I was psyched. I was like, this is amazing. We got Star Wars on the big screen again. And then I thought about it more, and I'm like, that feels like Star Wars because I've seen that story before.
Yeah.
It's just a retelling of A New Hope.
Yeah.
Still, I think it's a positive in the sense that yes, there are new Star Wars movies being made and TV shows and such. It can bring people into the Star Wars universe, possibly for the first time. Visually appealing and all that. Um, Star Wars fans get clowned on quite a bit. Sometimes I think just justifiably for getting super, you know, uptight about certain things. But I also do think that Disney as a whole, like the executives, they could do a better job of understanding the Star Wars universe and particularly what a large part of the fan base wants, and also provide something that's like low barrier to entry, people can get into. So I think there's something to be desired, but yeah, that's where I'm at with them.
I think like one of the things George Lucas probably wanted the Star Wars original movies to make money, right? But he also just had a story to tell, right? And now it's like it is just a different game. Like we want to make money, and like good stuff is probably better than bad stuff, but also like there's just the exploitation of good ideas or previously good ideas in a lot of like our filmmaking and stuff anymore, which like I think it was Martin Scorsese who had like giant critiques of like the Marvel universe from like a filmmaker standpoint.
Yeah.
But also me as a consumer, it's like I want to see Gangs of New York and I want to see Age of Ultron or whatever. I just thought of the right. Like I want to see them both. I think they both have a fit. They can both fit. It's just like one is not going to be like an artistic pursuit the way that the other is, right? And that's kind of the hard part about a lot of things. So
Yeah.
with that being said, like, all right, so what was when you got out of we kind of talked about this briefly privately. Like, it's gonna take a while for you to feel normally, like as a normal human being. Just after your autoimmune condition went downhill, you were in the ICU for you in the ICU for 4 months.
ICU for 5 weeks, but in the hospital for 3.5 months
Okay,
total.
yeah, yeah, good caveat. Still crazy. What were some of the first things that you started to do? Were like, all right, and I think it's been a long road too, but like, all right, I started to feel a little bit like myself. Like, what were like the activities you did? Tell me more about that journey, because that's some of the big things that like I think it's good that you're telling your story, dude, because people need to hear that story.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So I think one of the first things that made me feel more like me was being able to get back in the gym and actually hold the barbell.
Hmm.
And to get there, the whole rehab process was like truly starting at ground zero, where I vividly remember how difficult it was to even like push up in bed to sit at the edge of the bed. And for the vast majority of us, myself included, up until last year, you don't think about it. You just do it. You rock it out of bed and you're off to the next thing. Uh, when you can't do that, it's a big deal. So that's where we were starting, and then it was just working on sitting at the edge of the bed, standing, learning to take steps. Being able to walk 3 feet in front of me and then back, because that was enough for a day, and then get out to the hallway of the unit and progressively going like that. Um, and then getting to the point where I could go home. And it's not like when I went home, I was good, because I definitely wasn't. I was still very much bedbound. And rehab was like super basic, either body weight stuff, like sit to stands at the bedside, or yellow TheraBand stuff, which in our rehab strength and conditioning world, sometimes the yellow band gets a bad rap, but like that was plenty challenging. Um, and took about a month and a half, give or take, until I actually felt well enough to go down 2 flights of stairs, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it was for me. From my room down to the main floor and then down to the basement, because I'm fortunate to have a home gym. And yeah, just like one, seeing the home gym after, at that point it would have been like 5 months ish, but close to half a year since the last time I did, uh, was a big deal. Felt like, might sound a little corny, but it felt like coming home in a particular sense. Um, since I'm a guy who spends a lot of his time at the gym anyway.
Yeah.
And then when I was able to actually hold a barbell and do some like limited range barbell RDLs, I was like, oh, okay, cool. This feels good. And then probably a few months later, able to get back into what felt like more typical powerlifting training.
Hmm.
That was another moment. So they kind of stacked from there.
Did you kind of mourn like when you, dude? Because I like have a hard time like I haven't had anything bad happen, and I'll be like, damn, I didn't deadlift like 405 very well. Like, but like you literally like started at the barbell. Like, did was that like was it you had come back so much that like you were just grateful to be touching a bar, or was there still like a morning of like, damn, like a year ago I could do XYZ, right?
Yeah. At that point, I was grateful to be there. There was a whole lot of grief and grieving of the loss of all the things that I'd lost. I was down 40 pounds because I couldn't eat in the ICU. So went in weighing about 193 pounds, woke up at about 150. And, I had the skin killed off on my left hand because it IV medication didn't go intravenous to stay where it wasn't supposed to. And, felt like someone took my hand, among many other things. So like there was a whole lot of processing, and I tapped in my mental health professional who I'd worked with before. He and I worked together again to start to process a lot of that grief. So because I really started in the hospital, I started the rehab process in the hospital, just recognizing that, okay, what I have to do now is just like work at these sit to stands and work at these balance exercises. And like, this is what I need to do. And then that progressed to the light band exercises and the super lightweight stuff. When I touched the barbell, it felt like just the next progression. And I was just happy to be back doing something. I
Hmm.
had no idea what like the timeline was going to be, no idea, how quickly any of this would come back. So because of the process to that point, it was just good to be back, touching the bar again.
Hmm. Do you think now you have like do you think you'll go I think there's a lot of us who go through like these waves of like damn I'm not good enough, or like they'll see somebody else, like there's that envy of like somebody squatting more than us, like that bubbles up. Do you think this is like helped you let that go a little bit, or do you think that'll come back as you get back into like your competitive mode?
I do. I think about this a fair bit, and I think it's inevitable that it's going to want to creep in, and probably will creep in to some extent. But it does give me a really good sort of, not, I don't know if reset's the word, but like anchor point of like, I'll see somebody on Instagram hit a big deadlift, or I mean, shoot, take your pick. Somebody who's got a bigger Instagram following than me, someone who's
Yeah.
doing whatever better, and I'm like, man, I wish I did that. Wish I was there. And then it's just like, chill. You almost died last year, and you're still here, and like nothing's guaranteed, and like it's fine. We're all fine. And yeah, like that person is doing that thing well, phenomenal. What's the lesson that could be learned? And then we move on from there. Uh, Especially in the lifting and like competitive realm, just the nature of competition. Like to compete, you have to compare. So that's where I think it will creep back in to some degree. But my hope is to um, kind of limit how far it goes. That's the hope anyway. We kind of got to see how it goes.
I think it's like, yeah, that's like I mean, most of these things are mental frameworks that we need to construct, right? But like it's like you can compare yourself to someone else and you don't have to let it ruin your day, right? And like that's a high level skill, right? And then you also have to like start to ask like somebody said to me, I was on somebody's podcast like a month ago. His name's Greg, and he's like, "What's the function of XYZ?" I'm like, "Damn, that's a really good way to think about it. Like, what is the function of me comparing myself to them?" And if it's like for me to feel better about myself, like that's not good, or to feel bad about myself, because like I think we can get addicted to that. But if it's like literally just to see where you're at, so that maybe you can strive to get like where they're at, right? Like that's different. Um, comparison is the thief of joy, but it also can spur you on to try to get better, right? And like that's the duality of a lot of this stuff. And like lifting for me and you is like one of the most important things in our life, but also, and it's been a big reason for frankly your survival, but then also like at the end of the day, it's not the most important thing in our life, which is hard. It's hard because it is important as hell, right? But like it's not the most important thing. But it does facilitate a lot of other good lessons in life. I mean, me, you, John, and Soph, like we talk like lifting is our analogy for pretty much everything. How has your experience though like changed how you view training, or has it changed, or has it just reinforced what you already believed?
It's reinforced some things about it that I already believe for sure. It was pretty instrumental in my survival in the ICU for sure. Um, but it's changed some things, like it's made it easier for me to be okay with what's there on the day as I'm training. Partially because that was like a necessary thing. It still is a necessary thing as I build back from just being, you know, skin and bones essentially, and not having any guarantees about how any of this would go. So before, the angel and devil on your shoulder is like, oh, that moves. You think that moved pretty easy. The devil's like, go up, and the angel's like, you should probably keep it there. The devil would win that conversation more often than not. So I think what's changed for me is like just being more okay with where I am, and you can apply that to lifting. You can apply that to business or whatever. Just again, put against the backdrop of like none of this is guaranteed, and like it's the stuff that seems like it matters a whole lot here and now probably doesn't matter as much as we think, uh, in most cases. So yeah, it's kind of both. If I had to give
Yeah.
that answer.
How has it helped you like coaching people? Has it made you change think of things differently, or like I think one of the things I just read this morning, it was like literally we what everybody can look at the same piece of information, but really what differentiates like why we have differences of opinions is our past experiences. And I'm like, holy shit, I
Mhm.
never really thought about it that way. Like I had, but not in that simple of way, right? But like,
Yeah.
how has this experience like shaped your maybe view on like life and your view on training, and like how do you maybe pass that on to other people?
In one particular way, it's made it more challenging in the sense that people, when they find out about my story, and if I'm coaching them either through, Rebuild Stronger, where John and I coach and work with clients, or through the Honey Badger Project or any other place, or people will, with good intentions, say like, "Oh, I'm dealing with this, but that's nothing compared to what you went through." And that ends up being a challenge because I appreciate where they're coming from and the fact that they're acknowledging that what I went through was hard. My viewpoint is hard, and it's not a competition of whose heart is the hardest. Um, and particularly in a coaching sense, if I'm trying to help someone build their business and figure out what the next step is, I in most instances, I try not to, sorry, not that I try not to. Um, I don't want to have my story and my experiences really factor in too terribly much. Um, there was one exception to that recently, and I'm trying to remember the details. I think the point I was just making in that singular moment for that one person and that one coaching call was like just something about, I don't know, courage, or like just trying to encourage that particular person to take some action because his particular mission he says is important to him. Cool. Screw what everyone else thinks because we don't know how much time we have. But in most cases, I don't really want my story uh, factoring in those one-on-one coaching moments. But I do think it helps in terms of, some perspective of when people are in it and there's fear, there's uncertainty, there's some sort of threat either to their livelihood or their health or to life as they know it or want it to be. I can relate to that, and we can figure out a path forward together.
It's wild because like we turn everything into like a competition, or I mean, I do that to you sometimes. So like, nothing. Jared's dude, you almost died, like and it's like I'm half the man because I didn't go through. Like, if I was in the ICU, I'd do it better than Jared, which is like such a dickhead thing to do, right? But like that's literally where our ego goes, right? And I think that's one of the hardest things for us to do is like bounce back and forth and actually just be like a human, but also so I interviewed this guy named Austin Yoakum. He's a strength coach, and he's like the best thing you can do is like for athletes is like get them playing and then like realize that like you can overcoach someone and make them less athletic. And he's like and part of coaching, he's like the biggest thing that people should do is just realize like and he said this about himself. It's like I'm coaching because it feeds my ego. And it's like that's not a bad thing. You just have to say that openly. And then what you can do from there is be like, all right, you with that out of the way, how do I help you better? Right? And I think that's one of the hard parts about this stuff is like because at the end of the day, it's like all you can do is all you can do. And it's really what the person you're trying to help wants that is what matters, right? And we both know this too. Like there's a lot of coaches out there who it's just about them. It's about their
Yep.
ego. It's about and like it's not necessarily bad. It's just like gosh, it's I think me and you are not attracted to that anymore either. Like cuz we just
Yeah.
realize like, oh, what that is just a giant ball of insecurity, right?
It is.
Um
Can I just
so
say one more thing to clarify my
yes.
point there?
Yes.
Uh, because I think you hit on something really important where there's value in seeing somebody else's experience and thinking like, holy shit, like I can't believe so and so did that or they went through XYZ. And then the innate comparison of like, well, shoot, my problem seems small in comparison. I think the difference between that comparison ending up as a positive thing or a negative thing is, well, shoot, what lesson can I take from this? What motivation can I derive from this? How does this help me? And if my story ends up being something that somebody looks at and is like, well, shit, and I've seen these comments on one of my reels recently that has, reached a large audience. They're like, well, I want to run through a wall. I'm going to go crush my leg workout. Like, that's awesome to me because
Mhm.
that person or those people saw that reel. They're like, cool, I've got some challenges. I'm going to show up this way today for these reasons. Like that's really what I think matters the most. It's when people go like, well, shoot, my problems are small, but they're still problems and they're still standing in the way of
Yeah.
what that person wants or needs. That's where I think it becomes a detriment. So if that comparison puts it in perspective and it leads to a lesson learned or action taken, I think that can be really helpful.
It's hard to be like, okay, this is the objective truth on stuff, but like you probably were not sitting in your bed, a year ago at this time, like and being like, thank you for these challenges. Right. It's only on the other side where you have the clarity and the perspective to be like, oh, this is what I learned from there. Right. The tricky part about that is like continuing. I like this is one of my toxic traits, dude. I think like at some level, like your mental state during that, like I do think like humans can give up, like, and I know that sounds really dickheaded, like, but like I do think like you could have been in bed at one stage and just like literally like lost the will to continue. And some people, I think that's an okay choice. I'll make that caveat, like I think that's an okay choice. But like there is, and I've actually like read a decent amount, and it's hard to evaluate and qualify this stuff, but like you could have just been like, this sucks, Lord, take me home and peace out, right? And then, that would have been fine. It would have been sad and hard, but like what then when you're kind of you come through it on you're on the other side, or like what have been some of the revelations about like this was a moment that like kept me going? Like were there like little moments in the hospital? I mean, I know your girls probably kept you moving forward as best you could, but even then, the fear of not being the same dad probably could set in, right? You posted a couple days ago about like just picking up your kids or how long it took you to be able to do that. Like, and that's like, dude, scary as shit. Like to not think you can, like do that again? Like, what were some of the little things that kept you going?
Yeah. I mean, you're right. I'm gonna start with the second part of it. You're right as far as those things like, well, shoot, even in the hospital, the first time that my girls saw me, because Ashley, my wife, had to explain to them why I wasn't coming home, which was horrifying that she had to do it. Uh, Especially she was processing the situation, and then had to, uh, be a rock for these three little girls who have no concept of what's happening. Um, but then, the first visit that they made to me was I was still in the ICU. This would have been like probably early mid March of 2023, and I looked emaciated. I had no hair on my head or my face, like no beard, no eyebrows. Um, I had a tube, an NG tube through my nose down to my stomach. Just looked like a shell of the man that I was, and I was scared. I was like, "Fuck, my girl's gonna come in that door, and they're not gonna recognize me. They're not gonna want to come up to me, and I can't blame them for any of it. If I were, 5 and 2, I would probably feel the same way. But yeah, and it was scary. So they had to take a minute. Thankfully, there's a really incredible organization that worked out of the hospital to make visits for children. So they had a room off to the side. It was quiet. They got to do some crafts. And then one of my daughters, one of my twins, she was the first one to come back and like tentatively come over and give me a hug. And, that was big. So my daughters definitely kept me going. My wife kept me going. When I came out of sedation and things were starting to turn around, um, and I started to get filled in on all that was going on and recognize like just how different I was compared to when I first got into the hospital and lost my memory, because there was a big black hole in terms of like my actual memories that had to be filled in from other people. Um, there was a lot of despair. There was a lot of anger, sadness, grief. Um, there's recognition of how much of it wasn't in my control, and that like if I didn't make it, I didn't make it. But if there was any chance that I could get back and like just be there for my family, that was enough to make me give it a shot and give it the best shot that I could. So there were plenty of days where, I just didn't have it in me. It was a rest day, a mental rest day, because I needed it.
Yeah.
Um, or, I just suffered a big loss. Like one of them was when you're not using your throat musculature to eat, drink, or swallow, like all those muscles atrophy. And that's what happened to me. So I was NPO. I couldn't take anything in my mouth because there's a very real chance that I aspirate on it. Like some of it goes down to my lungs, creates an infection. I could choke on it, all that stuff. So to get back to the ability to eat, I had to pass swallow tests, which is a head trip. And the first time that I did that swallow test with a dynamic X-ray, they watch you swallow, they see how all of it works. I was praying, like, please, Lord, let me just pass this. Because I wanted to eat and drink so bad, dude.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I kid you not when I say that just a cup of ginger ale would have been like finding really an oasis in the desert.
Yeah.
And the speech language pathologist was like, I'm really sorry, but like, we can't, you didn't pass. And I was just lying on the stretcher with my wife as we were waiting for a porter to take me back, and I just broke down.
Yeah.
So there were I gave myself the time after those blows to just be broken up about it, but then it was just like, all right, fuck it, what's the next thing?
Yeah. That's one of the hard things that I think I have a hard time doing is like sitting and like just letting myself feel the emotions. And like, my wife helps me with that. And that's probably why men need women. We need people of different emotional profiles than us. But I've also like, I think one of the things is, I was on a neurosurgery floor as a nursing assistant before I went to physical therapy school. And like, I think like I was fortunate in regards to the fact that like I was a little bit older and like you just man like everybody on those floors is depressed. Like and I think we should go in with that frame and unfortunately we don't, right? Like but like you are depressed. You are not able to live freely with in like which is just it's such a giant constraint and then like yeah just the discomfort of everyday existence like just even having a dry mouth the whole time right it probably brings you it's probably a little bit traumatic right now just thinking about it right like
Flashbacks.
dude and then just like processing all that little stuff and then like and it's amazingly hard and I mean, I think kudos just for sharing your story, and but also just being raw and real about it too. Like, is big, right? So, um, the other thing that like, dude, so I'm just curious about like your vision. We can talk about this. I'm kind of getting into some deep stuff about you, but like it's the overcoming of this stuff and then the adaptability that ultimately like makes you who you are in a lot of ways. But like prior to this, like you were having difficulty with your vision. It's been something that you are inevitably going to go blind, correct? Like
Barring a
unless,
miracle of God or biotech, yeah.
yeah. Do you have a time frame, or is it like it's perspective, or not really?
So it's hard to say. So yeah, with the disease that I have, it's called choroideremia. It's a genetic thing. It mostly affects males, but there are some females who express it too. Um, and so I've been involved in two long-term observational studies so far. They didn't do anything to me, but they brought me in at certain intervals for years at a time to just keep track of progression of the disease. And through those visits, like talking to the researchers who were ophthalmologists, I believe every one of them, working under one of the uh, leading researchers when it comes to choroideremia. Like anyone who has anything to do with choroideremia and the research or development, if you say this doctor's name, they're like, oh, I know him. Um, so talking to the researchers at the most recent visits, based on the testing, uh, they had said like, yeah, I'd expect that your vision probably stays pretty stable until like, 55 ish. But then what rattled that and why I don't think that, we can say for sure is one, the disease progression varies from person to person with choroideremia,
Mm-hmm.
but then also with what I went through with HLH, initially my vision started going quite dim. It
Mm-hmm.
was like there was a dimmer switch on the wall for life, and it was down to about 50%. So, like bright rooms that I in my house, and I know how bright they usually seem to be, they were like not that bright,
Mm-hmm.
and all that stuff. And we didn't have any explanation for it other than like there's a massive autoimmune disease process going on, and all that. But then even on the other side of it, in October, um, I caught a cold, uh, had a lot of chest congestion, but then also seemed to affect my vision then. Same sort of deal. Went dim. I start using accessibility features on my devices, uh, and like really magnify stuff. And it was affecting both how much light I seem to get, but also visual acuity. Saw specialists, and no one had a fucking clue what's going on. And the best explanation was like, yeah, it could just be a progression of choroideremia. That didn't seem to track though. That's
Yeah.
not how I've seen any progression. It's always been more of a gradual thing and not a suddenly things are a lot worse, which is what happened to me. It was over about a 2 week span where things went really downhill. And they got better. And it seemed to track with when I had pneumonia or other infections. So anyway, long answer, but I was told 55, but I'm not really sure.
Yeah. I mean, man, how does that uncertainty like sit with you? Does it scare the shit out of you? Have you accepted it? Like what are the I mean, man, it's freaking hard. I'm freaking out about it internally. But like, yeah, tell me more.
Yeah, it's scared the shit out of me for about as long as I've had the diagnosis. I was diagnosed at about 21 ish. And especially as I had longer to sit with it, and as I reached milestones like getting married, having kids, because then it wasn't just me, it was, which would have been, it comes with its own concerns. How do I take care of myself long term? But then it's, how do I take care of my wife and my children long term? And there was always the question of, as a physical therapist, when I worked in the clinic, like, I can't do this forever. But I had no idea like what the next thing was. And then with coaching and shifting to being full time with my own coaching business, and then with Honey Badger Project, same deal. And I've had conversations with Frank and Cedric, the founders of Honey Badger Project, of like, long term, how can we make this work? And there was always an acknowledgement, or sorry, not an acknowledgement. The answer that I got from Frank and Cedric was like, we're going to find a way to make this work and like adapt as we need to. So that was very helpful. Um, but it's always been scary, and it has very real ramifications, not only right now in terms of, I don't drive because I have blind spots in my peripheral vision, and that's dangerous on the road. So it affects where we can live. It affects how I can get around, how easy it is to get from point A to point B. But then also, it has ramifications about what decisions we make, my wife and I, for our family, and all that. I've recently made a little more peace with it. I wouldn't say I'm at peace with it. That'd be a little too rosy for me right now, but there's more peace. I think particularly because I have more ideas um, about what the next chapter or chapters may look like.
Mhm.
I'll put it out there right now in terms of, I think a lot of it has to do with reading, or not reading, writing and speaking, in some way, shape, or form. Um, so what'll help me make more peace with it is, if I can do that, and I know I have the skills currently, that I'll keep working at making them better. But if I can make those things work and keep taking care of my family, that's what I care about.
It's pretty wild because like once I love the Rumi quote, like when you start to walk the way reveals itself, or when you start to walk the path reveals itself. But it's like, you know, it's not that like I want you to have these hardships, but like they really are shaping you in ways that like, I mean, if you have to tell your stories to survive eventually, because that's literally what you have to do. It's like, well, you have some pretty awesome stories, right? Like, and that's one way to look at it. It sounds like, man, that's kind of fucked up, Dave. But it's true though, right? And yeah, and you also have a very, very good speaking voice. And like storytelling is a very primal like skill. We just have to hone it, right? And no, I think it's like it's also just the testament to, having resources and people in your corner. And that's one of the things that I think has changed in my perspective on. I never really looked like business. I thought of business as like a bad thing, right? But we, even just the stuff we were probably exposed to some degree in like the corporate healthcare space, was just like, all right, is this really in the interest of people, or is this in the interest of like just a giant group that's growing, right? And I think my view of people doing business has changed just because like we're involved in, honestly, people, I think that when push comes to shove, like they put people first, right? Like you have to be in business to do that to some degree, but there's also so many avenues to put people first in like what we're doing, because the infrastructure is not giant, right? Like, which is another thing we can get into. We don't have to on this, not on this one, we'll do it on a later one. But when it comes to like, where do you see, I know you're doing more speaking, you're announcing for powerlifting meets, like that's on your radar. It's really cool. What excites you about like stuff like that?
I think it's, part of it is pushing boundaries, but building on skills that I already have. And so yeah, flying out to Miami this Friday to commentate at the Ghost Clash 3, which is a professional powerlifting meet down in the States. Obviously, just said it's Miami. Thanks, Captain Obvious. But that started because I was asked by some friends of mine who are meet directors near where I live if I wanted to commentate a local meet that they were putting on. And they pull out all the stops. They wanted to make this like a high-end local level meet. And they brought out the same media production team who are doing the live stream for the Ghost Clash 3. And so I was like, man, I've never done this before, but sure, I'm willing to do it. And I prepped for it and got there on game day, found the flow and found that uh it was easier than I thought. Um, I didn't do it alone. Thankfully I had some support with some seasoned vets, but it was very similar to what I've done a lot in terms of leading group calls through the Honey Badger Project, hosting podcasts. Once I was able to make that connection, I was like, oh, okay, now I can get a little more comfortable, still embrace some of the novelty that gives you those pre new thing jitters. And that's what this is going to be for me, because now it's again a significant step up from local meet to pro level meet where people are taking shots at all-time world records and stuff. But it excites me because I know I can do justice to people, especially having feedback from that first experience. People are like, man, I really loved how you kept it focused on the lifters and like you knew stuff about them. That's what I want to keep bringing here. And it maybe means some more exposure as far as people who might tune into the live stream to watch their favorite lifters. Maybe they like what they hear and they come to see what I have to say about other stuff. If that happens, amazing. Would love it. But yeah, I think being able to form relationships with other people, like the founder of the media company, she was surprised that it was my first time commentating at the local meet. She's like, we should talk because we have some other big events coming. One of the big events being the thing I'm flying out for now.
I'm
So
looking
that's
at
a pretty cool thing.
I'm looking at this, so I'm looking at the Ghost Clash, April 6th. It's April, yeah, this weekend, right? This coming weekend.
It's
Yeah.
coming weekend. Yeah, flying up Friday afternoon, and then it's all day Saturday, Sunday. The pro day is Sunday, and yeah, it's gonna be good.
Dude, oh my God, some of these dots. Oh, John Hack. Okay, yeah. Wow.
John Hack, Jamal Browner. Yep,
Dude, wild. Ah, some of those, the concept of being as strong as some of these people. But it is what it is.
I know,
Uh,
right?
what 5 years ago to today, like I mean, besides just the medical stuff, like what are you proud of this iteration of Jared that like 5 years ago you maybe would have no conception of, like, damn, I've come this far. That makes sense. That's kind of a hard, you get what I'm saying, right? But
I do. I'm with you. I'd point to resilience for one. Just like one thing that I've known I've been good at, for better or worse, is just putting my head down and getting shit done. Call it a trait of a recovering perfectionist, call it attributable to oldest child syndrome, whatever the case. I put my head down, I get things done, and I try to do it well. And I can take hits and come back from them afterwards. 5 years ago, yeah, wouldn't necessarily have an idea of what challenges would come up that would require that resilience in this particular way. So looking at what's gone down, I point to that as something that I'm pleased to see that I have done and certainly plan to keep doing. It's one of those things where like you can say that, and I don't know, people talk about some extraordinary circumstance. Like if I were in a combat zone and this happened, I would do X, Y, Z. Or if somebody, approached me and like threatened my wife on the street, I would like punch him in the face. And like, that's nice. You can think that. You don't actually know how it's going to go until it actually happens. So I'm at least pleased with that with the resilience in that particular way. And I'd also say being more willing to ask for help and being honest about the things that excuse me are hard, both in a mental health capacity. I started working with a mental health professional for the first time in 2022. One of the best decisions that I've ever made, I think. And also professionally, being able to say, hey, I'm having trouble with this, or I'm not sure what to do about XYZ. are you able to help me out here? Just putting aside the pride enough to do that has been very influential in my development as a person, as a husband, as a dad, as a coach. So in all the key areas of my life that matter the most to me, it's paid off.
The yeah, the great guru Cedric Damas, uh Cedric Haddad. He said that to me in a very early conversation. He's like, dude, you're because it's like, what is things like about yourself that you appreciate and that you value? And I'm like, I love the idea of being self-reliant, but I know that I can't actually like get everywhere I want to go without help. He's like, yeah, he's like, that's kind of the thing is like self-reliance is a great trait, but what you're really trying to do is be self-reliant while like asking for help in situations that you don't know like the next step, right? And like that's the hard part about a lot of this stuff. We can bring this back to like powerlifting, right? Like and we can bring this back to lifting and training. It's really hard to execute a plan that you are uncertain about. And also like man, I think this is the other piece of it too. Like intelligent people like I'm gonna get into trouble here. Like it's hard to be dumb, but like the best athletes are dumb in the best way possible. Like they don't broadcast out like they're they don't look at the like, what I always did with starting strength, dude, is I would look at the linear progression and be like, oh yeah, 405, 14 weeks from now, I'll be, squatting 405 for 5. And the problem is when you start to slow down at 275, because that's probably where your LP should end, like for me, right? Like that's normal, the genetic crop and XYZ. But you just go into this, oh, okay, I gotta like, then it becomes like, I gotta find the perfect plan, right? Or I gotta find, then you stop taking action and then you stop making adjustments, right? Where you switch things up all the time. And like life, you have to stick with something long enough to like see if it's actually gonna work. But you also need to take good advice from people that actually know you so that, and that's also relationship too, right? And I think I was just afraid to form relationship with people and not now I'm like less afraid to do that, right? And now you still got to choose who you hold in your circle closely. So let's wrap a bow on this in the last couple minutes here and like okay, like coaching when it comes to like lifting and stuff, like what makes a good coach in your opinion? How do you help people through a process that is uncertain by nature, right? And expectations and reality don't always line up.
Yeah. I think what makes a good coach, one is going to be them leading with curiosity slash really showing and demonstrating that they care about you, whether you're talking to them on the front end, if you're trying to feel out if this coach is someone you want to work with, or if it's the first time you're getting to actually meet with your designated coach as you join a program or whatever. If you get a sense, the strong sense that the person cares about understanding you, where you're at, where you're trying to go, without any other, you know, without a payoff other than without a payoff beyond understanding you well enough to help you get where you're trying to go. I think that's really a foundational thing. I think the coach needs to be someone who can be confident. I'm going to steal a line from Derek Miles, who takes it from somebody else, but always confident, never sure. And that I think comes back to the uncertainty of like, there are a bunch of different ways that we can do this in lifting, in business, whether we're talking about, do we run a conjugate program? Do we run DUP? Do we have you take a heavy deadlift every week, or do we do it every other week? Tons of different ways we can slice this, but being able to draw from personal experience, to draw from what you're giving them as the potential client, or like look at the situation, look at where you're trying to go together, and then draw some educated guesses and say, here's what I think and here's why. Being able to explain the rationale is another key thing I would point to. And not saying that the coach's word is gospel either. I think that there needs to be room and encouragement of like discussion about these things, but being able to say what they think and why, to have that make sense and to, decide on a plan of action together. And then the last thing I'd say to start, as I continue to paint with these big broad strokes, is I think really great coaches dial you in enough, like they get your number and figure out what makes you tick, and they start to get a sense of where the limits are and how far they can push you. Like there are how far they can push you and when. So there are some people that I work with, and again in Rebuild Stronger or in Honey Badger Project, who, because of our relationship, the nature of it, because of the rapport and the trust that we have in each other, I can just flat out say, you're being fucking dumb right now, or this is a stupid idea. Here's why.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that's going to resonate because I have them dialed enough. And there are other people who I may not be sure, and I may ask them, how hard can I push you here? Do you want the, perhaps softer, more empathetic answer to your question, or do you want the hard edge, like tell it like it is? I'll give them the option. I'm not saying everyone has to, but I think that really great coaches that I've seen and the ones that I've worked with, they get that figured out as quick as they can. They update it as they find out more because relationships change.
Mm-hmm.
But they'll use that to their advantage to push you to take the action that's going to help you get where you want to go.
Yeah. No. Beautifully said. Well said. I mean, it's like I really think PT school should just be like psychology, a lot more psychology. And then but it's just the trust factor and knowing who people are, right? And because the program, in my opinion, like is really just it's just trying to psychologically match like what they want to do with what they like doing, and that pushes them, right? Like the progressive overload can look a lot of ways, but it's just like we still got to figure out how to progressively load you, right? And some of that's just like confidence and putting on another bit of weight, or just teaching you to get like honestly, dude, the thing that always helps me is like higher volume, and like that sucks to say to somebody because then I know it's gonna come down the pipe, even though I just want to do like 3 sets of 3, but like when I squat like 3 sets of 8 or 10, like I just do way better because I get more reps in and it helps my brain. But it's hard because I don't want it to be that way. I want to be like, I want to just, do low volume and make progress, right? But
Yeah.
dude, good conversation. Where do people find you? And what is your Instagram handle? What projects are you working? Let's briefly wrap this up.
Yeah, man. Well, thanks for having me on, man. I enjoy this. I knew I would just because it's the nature of our conversations. But uh, as far as reaching me, the best place is going to be Instagram. It's where I'm most active. So jared.rebuild_stronger. Um, and yeah, feel free, come on over, shoot me a message about anything, whether it's about super nerdy Star Wars things. Tell me who your favorite Sith Lord is, or we can talk about lifting or anything related to anything that you'd like. Um, Projects that we're working on, we're growing the Rebuild Stronger team. A number of athletes prepping for competitions like Bench Worlds and other national and world level or international level competitions, which is exciting. I'm going to Miami this week. I'll also have another trip out to Portland, Oregon, for something that we'll talk about down the road, which is pretty cool as well. And yeah, uh, I talked about trying to get further into the speaking and writing side of things. So no firm projects there just yet, but for anybody listening, that's an open invitation. If you want to collab on anything like that, let me know. But yeah, just telling my story. And I guess I'm training for my first powerlifting meet back May 25th, and then one after that, excuse me, August 10th. So excited for those.
Got 2 lined up. Smart man. Just hit the other one right away. So, no, good luck on those. I'll talk to you more on the backside of this, but I appreciate coming on. We'll do another one down the road. So, but this is good stuff, man. Hey, Starlink held up just fine. So,
I switched to my other network.
oh gosh, it's all right. Hey, it held up though. That's a win. So, all right, buddy.
Yeah.
Peace. Have a good one.
See you.